Good morning, everyone. This week's Torah portion is the Tazria and Metzora, two parshiot, two portions that dealing with both different type of tzara'at. Loosely speaking, tzara'at meaning leprosy. For sure, it's uncomparable to our days and time when you talk about contamination and diseases. I would like to divide this talk to two portions. I would like to give at least a couple of minutes with the special day of today, which is the Yom Ha'atzmaut, the Israel Independence Day, and then we'll connect it and continue with the two Torah portion, Tazria and Metzora. If I was about to ask you a question, how many of you know someone or witness to someone who get killed during any of the Americans' war? If I ask that question, I'm sure that there are some either knew someone who injured or get killed. I'm not speaking about the ancient war like the civil war, but I'm speaking in more current, Afghanistan, Iran, even Vietnam. There are some people who know someone. It's a matter of fact that yesterday I officiated a funeral here of the late D. Green, and because it was coincide in the IDF Israel Defense Force Memorial Day, I asked that large crowd of many hundreds of people, and some people raised their hands and they said they knew someone who's injured or killed, and I said, how many of you knew personally someone who's get killed in action, was part of action? And relatively few. I said, my next question to you is, with that in mind, when you have the American Memorial Day, what exactly happened? Where do we meet? Usually it's at the pool with a barbecue. It's type of fun. There's nothing bad. I like barbecue and I like pool parties, in a sense, to get together, to know people and to chat and to have a good time. My problem with that concept, it's because of my background. Because the place that I was born and raised, the state of Israel, Yom HaZikaron, Israel Memorial Day for the soldier, it's the most solemn day. In that sense, for many, more than Yom Kippur. Why is that? Is that because it's a small country? I don't say that's the key reason. Is that because almost in every residential building you have some families that lost their child or brother or sister or parents? Maybe. But in general, Yom HaZikaron, the Israel Defense Forces and other Memorial Day, it's the saddest day because some still missing in action, some was in a captivity and either died or came back different person, and some is their own child or grandchild who is at the midst of his or her flourishing life, 18, 19 years old. On the top of that, there are many others, like people who serve special forces, police, Mossad, all kind of different abbreviation of unknown to public, while the great pain. So Yom HaZikaron is a very serious solemn day for the Jewish people worldwide, but particularly in Israel. However, there is another phase to that, which is today, the Yom Ha'atzmaut, the Israel Independence Day. It's not a secret that I'm a religious Zionist, and I have the privilege to spend many years in my life in service. It's type of feeling that is bittersweet, in a sense that on one hand we mourn over the lost, but the end of the day, the end of such a saddest day that people visit the cemeteries and making those prayers and study in memory of their loved one, and there's ceremonies all over. You have the Independence Day. It's a strong belief that the Arab world wants to have the Jewish people disappear, especially from the which we call the State of Israel, and it was a question of survival. And they call that army defense forces because the Israelis never initiate attack if it's not a question of saving their own lives. And it's always part of the instructions not to touch civilian, not to kill civilian, or to try to avoid any harm from any innocent civilian as much as you can. I remember that at the 80s in Lebanon, I remember that at the 90s in Gaza. That's the way we always did. Unfortunately, the Hasbara, the public relationship with the world is not the best, but the reality is that we are very sensitive to and appreciate the sanctity of life, I think at least the same or even more than anyone else. So the idea of Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel Independence Day, it's a time in a sense of celebration because that's the time that we have our own independence. But as typical Jewish is a controversial. Why Yom Ha'atzmaut is controversial? It's because there are always the extremes in both ways. There are those in the one side, the extreme, like the Satmar Hasidim, the Turei Karta, and people who refuse to recognize the State of Israel. And for them it's a sad day. You have the other side, the extreme other side, the religious Zionists, the building settlements, etc., who believe they right for the Jews to live everywhere. And therefore, for them, it's they saying a special psalm of hymns, Hallel, Thanksgiving. So the reality is, I remember going back 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I used to live in a neighborhood in Jerusalem called Har Nof. It's one of the relatively new neighborhood invented about 25 years ago. And it was a building of different synagogues, different shuls, and one floor, the first floor, they said a supplication, Tachanun, and the second floor they say Hallel, celebration, which means in one floor they're praying and thanking God for the Independence Day, in another place, another synagogue, they mourn over the Independence Day. And it's the old Jews, it's just the same building, and they worship in two opposite ways. So it is what it is, but the good news is that all of what our ancestors prayed for 2,000 years and yearn, my grandparents will go barefoot from Europe to have anything with the promised land. This is a huge blessing. The ingathering of the Jews from all four corners of the world and having their own land is a huge happening. Many rabbis call it as a miracle. But also it's present its own set of problems, which is the social issues, the interaction with the issue, the Jewish soul, the real future of Israel, and much more. So when it's come to halacha, to Jewish law, is a controversy. It was the great Rabbi Meshulam Rate. Rabbi Meshulam Rate was the chief rabbi of Czernowitz in Romania. He made Aliyah, if I'm not mistaken, at the 50s, 60s, and he became one of the head council of the chief rabbinate, the right hand of the late Rabbi Herzog, who was the chief rabbi of Israel, the father of the past president Herzog. And his book, called Mevaser, he wrote that on Yom Ha'atzmaut is not only obligation to say Hallel, to say all these psalms of thanksgiving, it's also obligation to say bracha, to say a blessing like a regular festival, which is again to the extreme. He explained that this huge miracle out of Treblinka and Majdanek and Auschwitz ashes, to have the Jewish people independent state, it's more than just thanking God for that. We should do it in the most lavish way. Not everyone agree with him. First, it's because it's the time of the Sephira. We count the Omer. And because we count the Omer every day, today, for example, is 19th day of the Omer, which is like 2 weeks and 5 days. and we count every day between Passover to Shavuot, and the first 33 days is a period of mourning. We mourn of the ancient student of Rabbi Akiva that died because of the lack of personal respect between them and controversy. And you see many observant Jews like David and myself who's not shaving at this time. It's a period of mourning. We don't get engaged in marriages. Basically, some do some engagement, but not most of the people doesn't involve with music and any celebration in this period. So is a sense, is a notion that because it's the Sephira, one should not engage with celebrations. The other side said, we are not in exile anymore, we are free, and we have independence. And it's a huge miracle that we can go out with no fear of wearing yarmulke, and no fear of being Jewish, and no fear of being beaten up like in Paris recently, or desecrated the synagogue and cemetery worldwide. So we should be thankful for that. We should be thankful to have army and forces and people go out and protect the Jewish state. So it's go both ways. The great Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef was the former Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel. We are good friends for years. It's a matter of fact that one of my books in 1987, one of my books on Rashi, he wrote a long letter of approbation and approval and praising. And at that time he was the chief rabbi of Israel. I'm speaking 87, 88. So Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, in my opinion, is very balanced, because he was a chief rabbi. On the other hand, he represents also the more religious part of the Sephardi community, which is the majority in many ways. He holds that one can say those psalms after the service, which means it should not incorporate as part of the service. Soon you see why. But on the other hand, should say some praising after the service. Why he feel that way? He goes straight to the sources, and I try to abbreviate his point of view. In the sources, the origination of saying Hallel, Hallel, as we said, is the thanksgiving we do during the festivals, originated in time, ancient time, that the Jewish people want to praise God for great miracles that happen in the land of Israel. So, for example, Purim, it's out of the land of Israel, we don't say Hallel. Festival in general, we say Hallel, praising God. The problem that some rabbis, like Rabbi Ovadia Yosef and others had, is Ben-Gurion declared, President Ben-Gurion, the first president of Israel, declared a Jewish state. The next day, it was a bloody war that caused a lot of lives. So even in one hand you said that it's relatively short, it was a matter of days, and miraculously the Israeli won both places, in the north, in the south, and then they went from one winning to another, 67, 73, etc. By the same token, Hallel was saying when, like in Hanukkah, like in the festivals, for a great festivity of miracle, and he asked what type of miracle it is if Ben-Gurion declare a state and the United Nations have the declaration and everything, but the next day you're going to a bloody war. So in a sense, he said you should say Hallel, but you should not use a blessing, or you should not incorporate as part of the service. As I said, it still remains controversy. If you go to, even within the settlements, there are people who oppose the government's behavior, and they not comfortable to do it, and they feel that saying Hallel is like indirect recognition of the government. Unlike here, that many people are indifferent, over there the Yom Ha'atzmaut is a very painful, hot issue that not going away so quickly. Between the people who recently are not so happy to serve in the army, since they feel that some part of the army is in the West Bank, to people who try to circumvent the army service and go out, or the moment they finish the service they to people who feel that the army is like God's mission to protect the land, to people who oppose the service in the army because they feel that it's not conducting according to their view of halakha. So with all said and done, you see that there are so many deep emotions and feelings when it's come to this that it's. But I can wrap it up by saying that the beauty of our people is we mourn over the loss yesterday, and in that sense, at the end of the day, we celebrate life and we go on in life with the recognition of our independence in any level. So those who wants to say tachanunist applications, they have their own rights. We are in that sense in a democracy. But those who have the strong emotion, feeling that it's a great gift, they have also the right to express themselves. I am personally concerned about the Jewish soul more than the other questions when it's come to independence, because to me the real fight or the real question is what exactly the prophecy of the Jewish soul. How are we going about to solve the future, the real good future plan of the Jewish soul? There are tremendous amount of flourishing of medicine and every field and endeavor, but the bottom line is, what's the next phase? What exactly is going to happen even 10 years from now? Is that independence going to survive the way that the people invented? So far, no, because the people who invent the Zionism and independence declared bankruptcy long ago. I meant the secular Zionism is no longer popular in any phase. So what exactly the next step? So that's, again, is a rhetorical question that left in the air. Regarding to these two Torah portions, so the first one is called Tazria, and Tazria is a portion of dealing with diseases, not only, but partially, that afflicted, if you see here at the very end, body, and need to go to the Kohen, and he recognizes that affliction, and he gives some type of remedy. And then Metzora is really more specifically the condition of the leper, someone who's physically afflicted with tzarat, and he is in a state that need to be secluded, need to be in the some type of like you have it in a hospital, isolation, contamination, etc. So the sages in the tractate Archin asked a very deep and serious question. They asked the question of why tzarat, tzarat meaning that type of ancient leprosy, happened to a person. In general, the Rabbi said that tzarat causes because of what? Why a person have these type of afflictions in his body and his house and his belonging? Why that happened? Anybody remember what's the cause of tzarat? Why a person received this leprosy? Because of what sin?
Sin.
You remember Lashon Hara? Because of the evil gossip. The sages said that the word Metzora, Mem Tzadik Vav Reish Ayin in Hebrew, is the same as Motzira. He's bringing evil out of his mouth. A good example to that is one of the biblical prophetesses. Remember her name? That she had tzarat and she was in a state of seclusion for 7 days.
Was it Miriam?
Very good. Miriam. One of the biblical prophetesses. According to the text, she was talking bad gossiping against her brother Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses. And as a result, she right away get punished. So again, it's a big question, why and what? The Rabbi said that it's basically, she is very high in the level of expectations. Still the rabbis ask, so she talked to whom? She just talked to her brother Aaron, and no one was there. But go to show us that God is listening, and God was unhappy. The minute she finished the conversation, it was all about Moses' wife, etc. It's all kind of family issues. She afflicted with that leprosy, and she was in a state of isolation for 7 days. The rabbi said that she was righteous, and because she watched Moses 81 years earlier, she was rewarded to have everyone waiting for her for 7 days until she was healed. But the lesson that we learn, if you look at the Siddur, the prayer book, at the very end, we have 6 zechirot. The Sephardim have more than 6. But anyway, one of them is everyday obligation to say, remember, do not forget the affliction that caused Miriam to be in the state of isolation as a result of her bad mouthing her brothers. So it's, in a way, the whole story of Tazria is warning and punishment. Nachmanides, for example, hold it as a violation of the positive commandment. There is a positive commandment, Zachor, to remember, and he said the same way as Zachor, you should remember Shabbat, the Sabbath, to sanctify it. You have a real positive commandment to remember, in a sense, the story of Miriam and not to repeat that mistake. He is so strong in his language that he criticized those great rabbis that put the 613 commandments in a book and explain each commandment what it's all about. They didn't put that as one of their lists. The one that put it in his list was the great Maimonides, Rambam. He put it as a be careful, remember what happened to Miriam, watch your mouth, guard your tongue. Now the next question is, how one connected to the other? We said earlier that the person afflicted with a physical leprosy, with the physical ancient sarat, either on his body or on his walls, because of speaking evil gossip. So the rabbi is asking a question, how one connected to the other, how exactly it works. Anybody have an idea? How speaking an evil gossip connected to a person's diseases? Any idea? If I'm saying, I'm bad-mouthing someone, I'm defaming his or her reputation, I'm saying bad things, how that connected to, God forbid, diseases that fall about, to come about myself? How that connected to the other? Any idea? Or what exactly the state of isolation? If you take a person and isolated him, like Miriam, you so isolated her for 7 days, how that connected to the sin of speaking evil gossip?
So that she can realize what she's done and repent.
Okay, excellent. One of the idea is to have a time to be with herself alone, to have a time to converse with herself and realize that she did something wrong, and she was punished because of that, and therefore she will not repeat that mistake. Others said that it was also a lesson for everyone else, right? Because everybody else see what happened to her and they learn the lesson, right? The deeper question here, much deeper, is how exactly the divine works. You see people who are constantly, if you watch TV, talk show, usually it's Lashon Hara, usually it's evil gossip. They bring one person, say something, and then they call the other guy and said, what do you have to comment over what he said? And then they see blood between the two and they have a higher rating, right? That's usually the business, right? So in the Torah, he needs to go before the Kohen, before the priest, and the priest give him instructions. Why is that? So the rabbi said that first they want to show the power of your mouth. In a sense, King Solomon said life and death is on the head of the tongue, which means that when a person is speaking evil gossip, he is using a God's ability that not everyone granted for bad. In other words, I'm using now Kabbalistic language. So hopefully you get along with that. It's like getting a credit card. You're getting a credit card and they give you a limit, how much you can use it. So in our language, which is called anthropomorphic language, people's language, is the idea that we're getting a credit card of words that we can use during our brief life in this world. If a person realizes that he's on a credit card, it means that one day it's zero, and that's the end of his or her ability to speak or to live. Therefore, they should be very careful with what they said, because they're using up the credits of words. In other words, God granted a person a certain ability, and he should use it to improve the world that he lives and not to destroy. Now, one of the famous writing of Maimonides in A Guide for the Perplexed, Maimonides wrote many books. One of them is 12th century physician, philosopher, and rabbi. He was the physician of Salah ad-Din, which was the ruler of Egypt at that time. So at the very end of his life, Maimonides wrote a book called Guide for the Perplexed. You ever heard that name?
Yes.
Good. So in A Guide for the Perplexed is a different ma'amarim, is different section. The third section is a special ma'amar. It's a section 47 that he's dealing with the whole concept of connectedness between speech and diseases. How one connected to the other, because it's look unnatural for a person that if he or she say something, even just for fun, they just bad-mouthing someone, and from that to get to the point of being isolated in a separate location, it's so he said that since God granted a person the ability of speech, they said in Genesis that God blew in a person's nostrils the soul of life and making a living being, and that bringing the ability of speech. God is also the one, as we said in Rosh Hashanah, who granted a person a place to live, which is the house. And in that sense, the walls in the house are listening. So if he is basically using this great gift of speech and great gift of a place to dwell for bad, is a reaction. So if he's lucky, there is a reaction right away. If he's not lucky, according to the Maimonides, it happens after the passing of a person, which is very well known in Judaism, that there is a continuation of the spirit after life. That's one of the reasons why we say Kaddish, is a... For people who are not familiar, there is a period of time that we said a special prayer, which is justified God's judgment, and is a serious period of time that we recite that prayer. So we believe that the soul has to go to a certain process of cleansing, not like Catholicism with a state of hell or
limbo.
Right, that's different. By Judaism, the soul have an 11-month period of reaching a point of cleanness, and only in a rare occasion the soul needs to come back and transmigrate. But basically the soul have a period of time of cleansing, etc., and that's the end. Then the soul can rest in peace. And is a strong belief in a theological approach, which is we have the ability to help the soul resting in peace by making those prayers. So it's a different period of time. It's like 7 days, 30 days, 11 months. It's a different period of healing, not only for us, but also helping the soul of the departed. So, by the way, do you know why we have a 7 days period after burial? Why it's a Shiva? Why it's 7 days? I know Shiva it's 7. Why it's 7 days? Just as a side question. Anybody know?
Well, I guess if you count all the days of the week and then you have the Sabbath or whatever, the day of rest, you have 7 days.
Yeah, but why the Shiva instituted as a 7 days? After you complete burial, you have a period of 7 days. Shiva, 7 days of mourning. Why is this 7? Why it's a 7 days period of mourning? So in the book of Amos, there is let me quote directly from the book of Amos. They use that concept of Shiva. I want just to read it for you directly. The Shiva, I'm not so sure if you're familiar, Shiva is basically 7 day period of mourning. Shiva in Hebrew is like 7. although is not directly mandated in the Torah, in the Bible, is nevertheless believed by the rabbi to have the, in a way, full force of a biblical law. So it's in the conclusion of the very end of chapter 8. In the chapter 8 of the book of Amos, and then at the end of the book of Amos, they said as follows. The prophet Amos speaks about the feast, the festivals, and mournings, and he said as follows. I'm just quoting Amos 8. He said, "And I'll turn your feasts, which usually lasted for 7 days, into mourning, and your songs into lamentations. And I'll bring sackcloth upon all lions, and blindness upon every head. And I'll make it as a mourning for an only son, and the end thereof is a bitter day." So the whole idea is, since those mainly festivals, which is the Passover and the Sukkot, is the biblical mandatory to have them as a 7 days period, right? The Passover 7 days, the Sukkot 7 days. The rabbi declared that the initial period of mourning for lost and loved ones should be 7 days. There are some rabbis who go a little different direction. It's in the book of Genesis that, Genesis chapter 50, it's written that Joseph mourned over, his father Jacob for 7 days. It's a very famous statement in the Jerusalem Talmud, not the Babylonian, the Jerusalem Talmud, that said that Moses instituted the 7 days of feasting, which is at that time for the bride, and the 7 days of mourning, in that sense that it's like a period of time of healing. So it's like a 7, the same as for the positive, for the festivals, is also 7 for mourning.
Is there any connection between that and the fact that God created the world in 6 days and the 7th day He rested?
You may say that, but what I try to say is the institution, the rabbinic institution of the process of healing of 7 is not just the 7 all the times, 7 in the Bible, which may be connected to the 7 days of creation. Is the whole period of, in Judaism it's all in balance, the same way as you're celebrating 7 days of Passover and Sukkot, you mourn 7 days. Anyway, just side note. So we're back to the whole idea of tzarat, of the leprosy. We said that it's can be in a person's house, it can be in a person's body, but it's a controversy. You have a great rabbi like 13th century Abarbanel in Spain who disagrees strongly with Maimonides. He said that one is nothing to do with the other. Don't put together the two. So, as I said, it can go in many different directions. But what we can derive from that is the whole concept of guard your tongue, hilchot lashon hara, the whole idea of guard your tongue. And that's something that the rabbis have a lot to say. I'll just give you an abbreviation. If you look at the second Parsha, the Metzora, part of the Metzora, the guy who afflicted with tzarat, he needs to bring a bird. The Kohen instructed him to bring a bird. It's 6:21. So in the Torah, thinking that tzarat, that this type of leprosy, it's in a sense mental disease, which means this type of sadness or curse happen as a result of lashon hara, but it's basically related to the mind. It's not so much with the body, which means the bird. Why are they using bird for atonement? Because one of the reasons the birds always chirp, right? So in one hand the bird is a representative of freedom. By the same token is the whole mindset that said that God's give us the freedom and we are free. What we're doing with that? We should use it positively. And in that sense, it's like atonement, especially the ancient time that they use this type of ritual. It's like measure for measure. In a sense, learn the lesson, not use it improperly. The rabbis go further to say that there is different level of lashon hara. Is one level is just innocent, but it's just gossiping, rechilut. There is much serious, which is the evil gossiping. there is much higher that is a defamation of character. And the rabbis go sometimes the defamation of character to reach a level that can be even without words. It's enough that you said, I don't want to say anything about that, for people to interpret it as something very negative. There are exceptions. When is the exception that the person allowed to speak lashon hara, evil gossip? When is it? Anybody knows? When do you allow, and it's even recommendable, to say lashon hara? No! Help me!
No idea.
When a person allowed to say something negative about someone else. First very good example is a situation that, you know, let's say if David owns a grocery store and he's about to hire, let's call that guy Abe, and Abe used to work for me and he stole money from me, right? So I'm going and give evil gossip. I'm going to say to David, this is what happened, be careful before you're hiring this guy, because otherwise you can get, you can lose part of your money. So be careful. That's okay, even recommendable. Another example, anybody have any in mind another example? When you're allowed to say lashon hara? Let's say with the matchmaking. When do you think you're allowed to say lashon hara? You're allowed to say an evil gossip?
If you know something about the parties that...
That's what? Very good.
That the other party should know about.
Excellent. When is your obligation to say?
I guess when you know something's cooking.
In what term? You're all right. I just want to lead you to a proper understanding. If you just don't like the person, that's not right.
No.
It's applied to what? If, for example, you know that a man and a woman are dating, and let's say he wants a children, and you know that she have a certain disease that she will never be able to have children, and you hear him speaking about soon to be engaged and to have children with her, and you knew that under no circumstance she can have children. So as painful as it is, it's not just not considering a evil gossip, it's your obligation. In other words, you considering a sinner if you not go ahead and tell one party. Because in many ways it's called let a blind person stumbling.
Yeah.
You put the blind at the front of stumbling person, because if you know that, for example, she is diabetic with certain diseases that she cannot have children, by all means, not even small percentage, and you know clearly that that's his motivation or part of his motivation, then you are obligated to tell her, as painful as it is. And vice versa. If you know a girl dating with a boy that he has a heavy mental diseases records, for example, question that someone asked, if you know that someone was in AA treatment for a long time, and he's now dating with a girl, and she thinks that he's a perfect match and there's nothing ever wrong with him because all the past was confidential and hiding from her. And you know that they're getting serious. Again, it's a very sad point, but it's your obligation to inform one party, because otherwise you are basically watching someone who's falling in a trap, directly or indirectly, as painful as it is. So what I try to share to you, in Judaism, it's not, in a sense, absolutely, one way or the other. We have to use common sense when it's come to this. In one hand, we warn against evil gossip. We warn against the consequence. We speak in a language that people understand, because it's hard for a person to know, oh, God's going to punish you after life. People don't take it that way. But if you tell a person, you see, it may happen, especially those commentators, Middle-aged commentators, and later, tell a person that you see affliction, make a self-search. Maybe it's connected to something that you did, which angered God, and He created, or you created for yourself, by a certain behavior, it brings a person to a state of mind if he is in a seclusion or in a to think. And use example, even on Miriam, you said, so how come the Torah speaks Lashon Hara about Miriam? Right? But the Torah does it in order for us to understand not to via negativa, not to do these type of things. By the same token, we have the obligation to say when it's necessary. So everything, in that sense, what I try to say is the same we mentioned earlier about Yom Ha'atzmaut, that everything is in balance, that you don't go to the extreme in any ways, just put the right mindset. In that sense, when it's come to speaking Lashon Hara, we have to have in balance. I saw many people in their office, you see a big sign, in this office, no Lashon Hara, no speaking evil gossip, which I like a lot, because I think that's a wonderful thing. I would like to conclude with a little bit mystical story. I heard once from someone who has a son who has a Down syndrome since the baby was born, and he's never able to communicate with the outside world. But they have in nowadays, in the modern days, they have like a board, and the child can carry this chalk in his hand and can point at some letters, and the teacher can put the letters together and make it out of sentence. So it's a well-known story in Israel that one of those Down syndrome child described that in his previous life he was very badly used to do a Lashon Hara. And his tikkun, his repair, is in a sense returned to this world but not able to speak. And it's frightening in a sense, but that was a very well-known story over there. Any question? This is your time.